Christmas time is almost here, and I'm feeling that gingerbread feeling. For this installment of Script to Screen, we'll be looking at one of my personal favorite Christmas movies, Home Alone, and another one of my favorites, Home Alone 2: Lost in New York. Both movies were written by John Hughes, who was well known for writing and directing many other comedies around that time, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Weird Science, and The Breakfast Club. Although Hughes wrote the screenplays, he did not direct either Home Alone movie. That honor went to Chris Columbus, who has written plenty of his own screenplays, like The Goonies and Gremlins. Home Alone's story was inspired by Hughes packing for a trip one day and making a mental list of things to be sure not to forget. He jokingly thought, "I'd better not forget my kids," and then realized that would make for an interesting story. What would a child do in a large house left to their own devices? Luckily, the story became much more than just that. One of the reasons Home Alone works so well is because it's both a child's fantasy and a coming-of-age story. We get to see Kevin do all the things that we would have done as kids, whether or not we admit it, and then have to do some quick growing, not only to survive his day-to-day life, but also defend his house from burglars. Meanwhile, his mother is doing everything humanly possible to get home to her child. Last year was Home Alone's 30th anniversary, and next year is the sequel's 30th anniversary, so I guess it makes some degree of sense for me to do this video now. As always in my Script to Screen series, I'm going to compare the final movie to some early drafts of the screenplay I found. I'm really excited for this one, so let's dive in. I am working with 3 drafts of the movie script. One is the revised first draft, dated November 17th, 1989. The next is the 4th draft, dated January 17th, 1990. The last one is close to the 4th draft, but with more revisions, dated March 13th, 1990. Although the last one is the closest to the finished product, there are still some differences. Obviously, the first draft is the one with the most differences, and will be referenced the most. Unless I make a note of it, most of the references I'll be making will be to the first draft. And, of course, although I'm sure there are plenty of drafts in between these ones, I will refer to them as the first, second, and third drafts to simplify the video. All 3 drafts start the night before the McAllisters head to Paris. The movie was originally to open with Kevin writing a letter to Santa, explaining to him why the house is so crowded and where they're heading. A nice way of handling the exposition, but I like that the movie pulls it off through dialogue heard between all the family members and the suspicious-looking police officer. In all 3 drafts, Kevin's age is stated as being 7. In one bit of dialogue in the first draft, his mother also mentions his age as being 6, so perhaps he was meant to be even younger in the planning stages. In the final movie, Kevin is 8 years old. Kevin goes to find a stamp for his letter. While looking, he passes the TV, where his Uncle Frank and cousins Fuller and Brooke are watching a gangster movie, Angels with Filthy Souls. Frank shoos Kevin away, saying his mother said he couldn't watch a violent movie. Kevin points out that Fuller and Brooke are watching, and Frank brushes this off as him being parental supervision. Kevin isn't his kid, so out he goes. In all the scripts and the movie, Kevin mentions this to his mother, Kate, but the preceding scene is only in the first draft. Kevin passes by his bedroom to see it's been taken by Heather, Tracy, and Sandra. They dismiss his complaints and shut the door on him. This is a little bit notable, because Tracy and Sandra never have any significant interactions with Kevin in the final movie. Kevin's mysterious neighbor is called Old Man Skeleton in the first draft. The later 2 drafts of the movie call him Old Man Marley instead. Chris Columbus expressed wanting to give parts of the movie a Dickensian feel, and the Christmas Carol name definitely helps. In the movie's audio commentary, Columbus mentions that the first draft didn't have a neighbor character at all. Although that's not entirely true, we'll see that the old man plays a much smaller role in this earlier draft. And, since it's listed as a revised first draft, perhaps the character was one of the revisions. In the second and third drafts, Frank is given a different introduction. Frank is written to be the relative that the family just sort of has to tolerate. In his would-be first appearance, Frank teases Kevin by pulling his pants down and running off. It solidifies him as a character we're not supposed to like, but it's a very odd moment. It got as far as being filmed, but thankfully it was cut from the final product. Still on his search for a postage stamp, Kevin stops to ask the fake police officer if he has any. The officer does not, but that will not be the last time he has a run-in with Kevin. Also, when the police officer smiles at Kevin in the first draft, he is missing a tooth. The second 2 drafts and final film change this to a gold tooth with a visible sparkle. The ensuing chaos from Kevin attacking Buzz was a lot harsher in the original script. Pizza flying everywhere, family members crashing into each other, complete mayhem. It's toned down in both the other drafts, looking much closer to the final movie. Either way, None of the scripts make mention of the most important detail that comes with this scene: Kevin's passport accidentally getting tossed out in the fray. It's just one more thing to contribute to his family not realizing he isn't with them at the airport, and an example of how well this movie really covers its bases with how Kevin is left behind. Although there are plenty of differences in these drafts, there are also plenty of scenes that are virtually the same as the final movie. One of these is the argument Kevin has with his mother. I think the scene with Kevin and Kate arguing before Kevin is sent to the attic is a crucial part of the movie. We have to see things from both sides. We've been following Kevin, and we've seen how everyone is either dismissive or outright hostile towards him. His breaking point with Buzz is understandable. As for Kate, she's trying to organize 15 people flying to Paris during Christmas time, so naturally she's going to be stressed. She doesn't need any more issues to deal with. If it weren't for this scene, their subsequent growth and reunion wouldn't be nearly as effective. A common joke is how this movie would never happen today with cell phones, the internet, and tighter airport security. While this is true, the same can be said for many other movies. And even in this movie in 1990, they really had to give a lot of reasons for how Kevin ended up home alone in the first place. The script layers it all on, with the trashed passport, the storm knocking out the phone lines, the mad scramble to the airport, Buzz messing up Heather when she's doing a head count, the neighbor kid getting mistaken for Kevin for a moment, and Kevin's belief that this is a supernatural event that he caused. It really didn't seem like an easy feat to pull off, but I'd say John Hughes did it. Speaking of airport security, the first draft does make a brief mention of the family passing through the metal detectors. I assume it was dropped to make the race to the plane seem even more frantic. Kevin wandering the house is a little longer in the earlier drafts, the first one in particular. Once he's alone, everything about the house seems creepier. As he searches, his eyes linger on certain objects. A horror movie poster in Buzz's room, for example, or a bronze statue in his parents' room of hunting dogs attacking a doe. While the movie has Kevin enter the basement and imagine the furnace coming to life, the scripts hold off on that for a bit, and have Kevin look down the stairs and not even dare to venture any further. Upon remarking, "I made my family disappear," he does not appear quite as happy about it as he does in the final movie, and is instead in a state of shock. At this point, instead of launching into a montage of Kevin taking advantage of being home alone, we are properly introduced to the burglars in the daytime, Harry and Marv. In the script, the characters are named Harry Lime and Marv Merchants. I don't believe their last names are ever said in either movie, but you can spy them on a newspaper clipping in the sequel and some promotional materials. The villains sit in their van, getting ready to rob the many houses on the block. Part of the dialogue for this scene was dubbed into them watching the automated lights go on in the final movie. The two share some dialogue about how no one stays home anymore, and the holidays have, to some point, lost their meaning. The scene was even filmed, but cut. I've heard this scene was cut because it made them come across as a little bit too sympathetic. I think it's really Joe Pesci's delivery that does it for me. He gives a very understated performance in this moment, and even though they're burglars trying to justify breaking into people's houses on Christmas, the way Harry quietly muses on society comes off as being really authentic. Like someone who's had a rough past and is at least speaking somewhat from the heart. It would be a lot harder to watch him get a blowtorch to the head with that in mind. This idea is supported more in some later dialogue that was cut. Harry tells Marv that the McAllister house is the difference between him having a good or a bad Christmas.
"And Marv, I ain't had a good Christmas since 1962.
That long?
That long.
Well, gee, Harry, I don't want to spoil Christmas for you. While Kevin is recovering from apparently making his family disappear, he watches some home videos. In the first draft of the script, they're on tour at Universal Studios, and in the second draft, they're in a hotel at Busch Gardens. As Peter films, Buzz yanks down Kevin's pants. I wouldn't be surprised if you learned that one from Frank. Kevin takes a swing at Buzz, but accidentally hits Megan instead. A small fight breaks out, and Kevin ends up taking all the blame. Kate even says they should leave Kevin behind to teach him a lesson. At this point, present-day Kevin stops the tape and smiles, no longer regretting his wish. I'm glad they cut this one personally. Our sympathies already lie with Kevin at this point. We didn't need another scene showing him being bullied and then blamed for retaliating. This part also makes Kate look incredibly unsympathetic, whereas her anger was a little more understandable earlier. I've heard that Catherine O'Hara screaming Kevin's name on the plane was the actress forgetting her exact line and trying to save the take by just shouting. This seems to be an urban legend, since all three drafts having her doing the exact same thing. The first draft of the scene, though, shows what happens directly afterward. Kate leaps up and runs to find where the kids are sitting. Peter chases her, but is tackled by an air marshal and handcuffed. Later on, after things have settled down a bit, Frank offers Peter an attempted comfort. "If I were you, I'd be damn flattered the Federals thought you had a gun in your pocket." What follows in the first draft is an incredibly elaborate sequence. When you think Home Alone and elaborate sequences, you'll probably remember the booby trap scene, which has become a staple in the franchise. But the first draft tried to outdo this with... well, I'll just lay the scene out for you. Kevin has fallen asleep in front of the TV when he wakes up to Peter's voice. Kevin sees a new home video playing of the family standing in a nice house around a Christmas tree. Only, in the video, Kevin is not there, and the family are speaking directly to him, the viewer. With creepy, dissonant cheerfulness, they tell Kevin that they are wherever he wished them away to. It's sort of like heaven, they say, but we don't know for sure. Kate continues, giving Kevin a warm smile. It wasn't your fault that we went away. You didn't know what you were saying. I hope it doesn't ruin your Christmas, honey. The image flickers out, leaving Kevin alone once more. Except he's not. The nutcrackers nearby come to life and begin chasing Kevin, chattering in creepy little voices. They corner Kevin against a trash compactor. The compactor's drawer opens, stretching out enough for Kevin to fall inside. He is squished into a box shape, now resembling a Christmas present, complete with a bow. The compactor shoots Kevin out across the kitchen and down the laundry chute as the nutcrackers cheer. In the basement, Kevin's body reverts to normal, but he is now face to face with the monstrous furnace. It too comes to life and reaches out its pipes to coil around Kevin. Kevin manages to escape up the stairs. As he runs through the house, pursued by the tentacle pipes, everything else comes alive and begins to chase him. And I mean everything. Chairs, clothes, dishes, everything is out to kill Kevin. Buzz's tarantula grows enormous and joins, along with the hunting dogs from the statue. Kevin retreats into the attic and climbs onto the roof, but even there, the icicles try to attack him. Many of the creatures from within the house climb up after him. Finally, one of the furnace's pipes smashes through the roof, grabs Kevin's leg, and tosses him up into the night sky. Kevin wakes up, screaming. This impressive nightmare sequence went on for about 7 pages in the script, and it really would have been something to see. Chris Columbus mentions that he storyboarded it, and I can definitely understand why he was excited to use it. One of his previous films, Young Sherlock Holmes, had some elaborate hallucination sequences that followed along the same lines, but this nightmare would have presumably outdone them all. It proved to be too expensive to do, especially with the relatively small budget the movie was given. Both the following drafts attempted to do scaled-down versions of the nightmare. In the second draft, Kevin keeps believing that things in the house are alive before they appear to go back to normal. For example, the nutcrackers sing a devilish version of Silent Night, and the grandfather clock briefly distorts itself. Realizing how cold it's become, Kevin hesitantly steps into the basement to check the furnace. The many mannequins all mock Kevin before turning inanimate once more. As Kevin approaches the furnace, it comes to life and roars, sending Kevin scrambling up the stairs and waking up a second later. The third draft shortens this to only the furnace, but this time the furnace rips itself off the wall and charges at Kevin, who wakes up before it can engulf him. While I'm fine with these scenes not being used, fantastic as they sounded, I think they would have helped Kevin's arc somewhat. He starts out afraid his own house is trying to kill him, but then he's able to defend that very house by using it to brutalize a pair of intruders. We still see this growing courage in the final cut, just in slightly more subtle ways. Because anything is subtle compared to that crazy nightmare. When the McAllisters land in Paris, Peter's brother Rob has assembled a grand welcome for them at the airport, with a 5-piece band and an actor playing Santa Claus. Rob is enthusiastic, while his wife, Georgette, is embarrassed. Rob asks what the French equivalent of ho 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 is, and is disappointed that's the same thing. He asks the Santa to say he instead, thinking it sounds more French. When the main family arrives, they barrel through the welcome banner the others are holding on their way to the payphones. This scene, minus the band and Père Noël, was filmed and cut. As the scene plays out in the first draft, the band and Santa follow the family to the payphones, and as Kate frantically dials the police, the Santa obliviously tries to cheer her up with a he. Leslie goes through the list of neighbors Kate gave her to call, to no avail. The only one she hasn't tried yet is a Mr. Skeleton. Kevin's siblings are against the idea of calling the South Bend Shovel Slayer to check on Kevin. Kate rightfully brushes it off as a mean rumor the kids started about an old man. "Brace yourselves, everyone," says Buzz. "The next time you see Kevin, there's going to be a 6-inch dent in the side of his head." In the earliest draft, Kevin's initial naivete is shown more. He leaves the back door open as he goes out, for one thing. He doesn't wear a hat or gloves. Outside the drugstore, he pays a 6th-grade girl to tie his shoes. At the store, Kevin buys a single stamp for his letter to Santa in the first draft instead of a toothbrush. The scene plays out a bit differently here. Kevin has neglected to put on gloves, and his hands hurt. He asks about rash medicine, but says it's for his father. The clerk asks for more information and offers to call Kevin's parents for details. Kevin panics and runs, not paying for the stamp, leading to the police chase. The police officer, identified in the script as Officer Tony Costello, chases Kevin to a frozen river. The ice is thin, but Kevin is able to get across, while Officer Costello gets his leg caught in the chilly waters. The other two drafts have Old Man Marley being present, and being the reason Kevin leaves so hastily. After Harry and Marv lose sight of Kevin, there is a scene with them driving off, wondering where he went. Two versions of the scene were shot, with a lot of fun improv from Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci. One version even had them singing their own warped version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. It really shows the chemistry between the actors, and you can hear some genuine laughter as they're singing together. In the first draft, after eluding the burglars, Kevin comes home to find that he left the back door open. Now he's worried that there's someone inside, and walks through the house, loudly talking about all the weapons they have stashed away. "Dad, isn't it great to be home? Isn't it cool that we got all these army guys with us? And all these cool weapons and vehicles and mortars and stuff? That's so hot. Hey, Snake Pit, let me see that Wolverine claw hand with the movable penetrator venom injector. Oh yeah, this is really deadly. Wow, and you got lots of fresh batteries." As Kevin bluffs, the coffee maker, which has been on since the family left, finally overheats and explodes. Kevin runs out into the night, only to remember that the outside world is even more dangerous. A gruff voice calls to him, and Kevin runs back into his house. It turns out to be a repairman, saying that the phone lines are fixed. In all three versions, the very shaken up Kevin slams his door and announces, "This is my house. I have to defend it." This moment, of course, was moved to later on in the movie. There was actually a montage here of Kevin setting up his first attempt to dissuade the burglars. I'm guessing it was dropped to make the second montage more effective. The scene where Kevin scares away the pizza boy originally came directly after the montage, while the final movie moves it to after Kevin's first elaborate prank. Actually, a lot of the various scenes of the rest of the family in Paris, Kate in the airport, and Kevin at home are ordered slightly differently in the different drafts, and I assume a lot of their final placements in the movie were an ongoing post-production editing decision. After securing a lovely cheese pizza just for himself, Kevin launches his plan into action. The original idea was that Kevin would play the piano and keep hitting the wrong notes. The mannequins he set up would throw their heads back and laugh each time, thanks to some strings in a laugh box. The decision to change it to a more traditional party was apparently thought up on the set, and you can still see Kevin wearing the laugh box in the final film. The first draft included what would have been a fairly dramatic scene for Kate in an Italian airport. Tired, lost, and confused, Kate attempts to find the gate for one of her connecting flights. No one seems to understand her, or they actively ignore her. Finally, she is pointed in the right direction, but the plane is taking off in 3 minutes. As Kate runs, she begins to discard all her luggage that's slowing her down. As she approaches the security gate, Kate discards any and all jewelry, watches, and anything else that might hold her back. Leaving it all completely behind, she makes it onto the plane in the nick of time. After Kevin leaves the grocery store in the first draft, he encounters Officer Costello again. The officer chases Kevin, who manages to hide in a charity donation box. The idea of a legitimate authority figure pursuing Kevin would be used to better effect in the sequel. When Harry and Marv come back to check out the house, it's Harry who listens inside and is fooled by the gangster movie. All three drafts have this happen, with the dialogue between Harry and Marv being more or less reversed. The final decision to have Marv be the one to get tricked feels a lot more true to both the characters. Back in Paris, there's a very sweet scene between Linny and Peter about why they're still on vacation without Kate or Kevin. It's this that ultimately prompts Peter's decision to fly home. It's not the funniest of the deleted scenes, but I think it's one that really should have made the cut. There were a few other bits planned for the family in Paris that gave them all more to do. Jeff, for example, was to have been mapping out Kate's flight plan. Another moment had Frank sit next to Megan, who immediately got up and moved to sit next to Buzz, apparently considering her brother to be the lesser of two evils. Reportedly, test audiences found these Paris scenes to be the least engaging, leading to them being cut or trimmed, so I guess that's just how it goes sometimes. The scene at the church with Kevin and his neighbor is an interesting one, since in the 3 different drafts, you can see it forming and taking its proper shape. In the first version, Mr. Skeleton starts right away, assuring Kevin that the rumors are untrue. He continues talking about how his family's moved away and he never sees them anymore. Kevin can relate. Mr. Skeleton goes on to say how important being in that church has meant to him over the years. I was baptized in this church. I got married in this church. My boys got married in this church. I said goodbye to my wife in this church. You got divorced in a church? Says Kevin. Skeleton laughs and explains that his wife's funeral was in the church. He expresses hope to see her again soon. The subject gets to God and making amends. Skeleton mentions the trouble Kevin's had with his family. Kevin is surprised he knows. The neighbor explains that they called him to get the message to Kevin that they're all right and coming home. He's been trying to approach Kevin to let him know, but the kid runs from him each time. Now Kevin is relieved. After saying a prayer that things will turn out okay between him and his family, Kevin leaves the church, only to remember that the burglars are still targeting his house. This first version is alright, but by letting Kevin know that his family's coming home and haven't been erased by Kevin's wish, it takes a lot out of the emotional impact of their eventual reunion. It was better to leave Kevin uncertain about the whole thing. The second draft has a simpler version, where Old Man Marley starts by pointing out his granddaughter to Kevin, before mentioning the rumors surrounding him. This version still has Marley talking about his late wife, and Kevin praying, but doesn't have the neighbor being aware of Kevin's Home Alone scenario. The final version of the script introduces the idea that Marley is estranged from his family because of a fight they had years ago. That really helps connect Kevin and Marley, and seeing Kevin be able to give the man some encouragement shows how much Kevin has grown himself from the experience. And now we've reached the highlight for many, the trap sequence. Those hilarious, brutal, iconic traps. It's been pointed out many times that Harry and Marv should have died at several points because of Kevin's booby traps, and it does admittedly feel just a little bit jarring the way it plays out. The rest of the movie, although it's been silly, has more or less followed the rules of real life, even when the situation Kevin is in is really contrived. When the Wet Bandits attempt to enter the McAllister house, the movie suddenly takes on the logic of a Three Stooges short, where our two Stooges can suddenly survive virtually anything with only a few noticeable scratches. I think the reason most of us are able to overlook this is because everything about the sequence, the acting, the camera work, John Williams' score, is all so funny and well done. We're entertained, so we're willing to suspend our disbelief. It helps that it comes so late into the movie too. If the audience has made it this far into the story, the movie might as well just really ramp things up. Since each trap most likely had to be meticulously planned, the second two drafts of the script correspond pretty closely with what was filmed. The first draft has some different ideas, most of which involved Marv's trek through the basement. When Marv enters the basement in the first version, Kevin has scattered matches and firecrackers across the floor. Marv steps on them, accidentally igniting several. Oblivious to the lit fuses, he pulls the light cord and gets lawn patio furniture dropped on him instead of an iron. Marv falls backwards into the firecrackers, which all go off around him. The staircase leading up to the main floor is not just coated with tar. Instead, Kevin has coated every other stair with wax, making Marv's ascent even more frustrating. Kevin has also positioned a pile of barbells near the stairs, which Marv inevitably knocks over. The barbells slam into him, knocking him back down the stairs into a trash can full of sawdust. Later on, after the close encounter with the tarantula, Kevin leads the burglars up the attic stairs. He positions an entire dresser to come barreling down into the crooks. This idea would be used in the sequel as a tool chest. After Harry and Marv swing into the house, Kevin has yet another idea planned. He's tied a rope across the roof, laid out behind a row of icicles. As the dazed burglars lie on the ground, Kevin ties the other end of the rope to their truck and puts it in neutral. As the truck lurches forward, the rope dislodges the icicles, which come raining down on the bandits. The way the bandits are ultimately foiled is different in the first draft. Since the neighbor character isn't used as much, he's not the one to save Kevin. Rather, Kevin runs into the Murphy house's basement, which does not appear to be flooded. He runs up the stairs and opens the door. A monsoon of water is unleashed. Kevin, having not realized what was on the other side, is able to hang on as the water crashes down into the basement. He is then able to run out of the house and across the street to his own home safely. The burglars, who instead follow him through the basement instead of cutting him off, are caught by the police, who arrive a moment later. The decision to have Old Man Marley rescue Kevin was a smart one. Not only is it touching, but it actually gives us a brief moment where the Wet Bandits manage to take control of the situation. It's not nearly as exciting if they remain one step behind Kevin the entire time. Interestingly, the first draft of the script has the cops figure out that Harry and Marv are the ones who robbed all the houses because of Marv's stupid calling card of flooding them, something that Harry was explicitly against. The second two drafts omit this detail. Thankfully, it was put back into the final cut. The scene where Kate talks to Gus, the Polka King, in the truck, is not in any of the drafts. Apparently, that entire conversation between Catherine O'Hara and John Candy was improvised. The earlier part, where he tries to get her to play his clarinet with the band, was also most likely ad-libbed. The script only mentions Kate forcing herself to smile. I think the talk between the two of them is a very well-placed scene. Not only is it funny, but it also makes for a nice breather between the cartoon violence of the booby traps and the emotional finale. Speaking of the finale, all 3 drafts have a bit where Kate rings a bell from the Christmas tree to get Kevin's attention. Even though it's meant to be sweet, to me it almost comes across like she's teasing him, so that bit being cut was probably a smart move. The original script ended with Kevin's line that he just hung around while he was home alone, no scene with the neighbor reuniting with his family. There's also going to be a gag during the credits where Harry and Marv are seen in the county lockup with the other prisoners, watching a familiar gangster movie. When they realize it's the same movie that Kevin used to trick them, they simply share a look. The second draft of the script keeps the gag with Harry and Marv, but also includes Old Man Marley and his family. The third draft omits the Wet Bandits part entirely. And that's Home Alone. This is the first time I've worked from multiple drafts of a script, and like I said, it's really fun to see the movie we know and love take shape and fully form itself into a Christmas classic. But do you know what? I'm thirsty for more. And although I don't have 3 more drafts, I do have 1 draft of the sequel, Lost in New York. It's listed as Production Draft B, dated September 10th, 1991. The first Home Alone was a smash hit, so a sequel was inevitable. I have a feeling there was a sense of urgency to crank out another one right away while the child actors were still young. Thus, John Hughes' screenplay for Home Alone 2 feels copied and pasted at times. Even as a kid watching it, I could see that many plot beats of the first movie were repeated. The mad dash to the airport, the creepy loner character who ends up being kind and helpful, and of course the booby traps. But even with that in mind, I still enjoy both movies. It seems like Hughes and Columbus both wanted to give the audiences exactly what they wanted. More of the same. While I'm always one to stress taking the creative route, there's still something weirdly comforting about going from Home Alone 1 to Home Alone 2. But let's be real, I'm not being objective in the slightest here. And to the movie's credit, they do try to up the stakes. Kevin is no longer somewhat safe in his own home, even if he was alone and his house was a target for burglary. In New York, he finds himself wandering the streets and targeted by the police for credit card theft, all while 2 criminals are ready to kill him on sight. They also amplified some of the gags from the first movie. Now, Kate no longer just screams Kevin's name when she realizes they're separated. This time, she faints as well. Harry doesn't just get his head set on fire and has to put it out in the snow. Now he has to do a handstand on a toilet to pull it out, but the toilet's full of kerosene. Excessive? Probably, but it doesn't stop me from laughing. Unlike the first Home Alone, which has plenty of deleted scenes available on its DVD release, along with a fun, insightful commentary track, Home Alone 2 has never had any bonus features. While we know for certain that some of the omitted scenes in the first movie's screenplay were filmed, there's no concrete information about the sequel. There was a novelization of the movie that featured certain scenes I'll be mentioning that didn't make it into the final cut, but I'm still not certain how many were actually shot. Our first big difference, in fact, is not in the script I have, but the novelization. It opens with a prologue where the Wet Bandits have just been arrested for trying to break into the McAllister house. In this version, Harry is able to pick through their handcuffs, and the 2 escape the squad car. Back at the house, Kevin is cleaning up all of his traps. The bandits return and chase him into the garage where they fall victim to 2 more traps, a lawnmower and some barbells. The 2 wake up screaming in jail, still plagued by nightmares a year later. I feel like using this would have once again started the burglars off on a slightly too sympathetic note. Yes, they were robbing and flooding houses, but there's something truly sad about them developing PTSD over their encounter with Kevin. That being said, it would explain even more why they're so eager to kill Kevin on sight in New York, even when avoiding him at all costs would have been the smarter move. Upon doing some further research, it looks like this prologue really was filmed. I found a few screenshots on some promotional trading cards of all places, specifically for the sequel, showing alternate shots of the burglars being arrested and Kevin cleaning up the traps. Hopefully we'll see that footage someday. Also, the lawnmower trap I mentioned was later used in Home Alone 3. The first notable difference I found in the screenplay itself happens shortly before the choir recital. Kevin needs help with his tie, and his father tells him he needs to do it himself. Kevin asks Jeff and his cousin Rod for help, but they both decline. They're both relatively nice about it, with Jeff only using clip-ons, and Rod saying that wearing a tie would hurt his image, meaning he doesn't know how. That leaves Buzz. Being a dependent little worm definitely has some serious disadvantages. A little later, when Kate asks Buzz where Kevin is, Buzz claims Kevin's been fooling around. Kevin comes down a second later, with his tie tied in a huge ball around his neck. This prompts a typical response from Uncle Frank. "Hey, sport, you trying for the worst dressed dink in the 5th grade?" Whether or not the scene was filmed, it wasn't a major loss. Everyone who's seen the first movie knows that Kevin and Buzz have the most friction of the siblings, and Buzz's stunt at the recital in the very next scene would clinch that for any newcomers. I have to say, though, I like the script's version of Buzz's flowery, insincere apology even more than the movie version. "I'm sorry. I was immature. I was nutty in a delinquent fashion. I apologize to all of you. And I apologize to you. Sorry, Kev. I will never disparage your ears again. I hope you can forgive me. And I give you my word that I will not engage in any more hijinks that might spoil our trip to Florida and set a tone inconsistent with the spirit of this most sacred holiday." That being said, the shorter speech he gives in the movie is slightly less obviously fake. I can somewhat buy Kate accepting that one. Interestingly, the script doesn't give the family a reason for sleeping in this time. In the movie, they had Peter accidentally reset the clock. I assume that leaving out that detail was an oversight during the writing process, or Hughes had made a note to himself to come up with a reason later. During the family's now annual sprint through the airport, there's a little more emphasis on Kevin continuing to clash with the others while he's trying to get those stupid batteries. There's also another reference to Frank's cheapness, where he tells the skycaps at the airport that Peter will pay for the baggage claim tags and that he's a great tipper. Instead of sitting next to the guy speaking French on the plane, Kevin finds himself next to a young woman. She asks him if he's flying alone, and reminisces about how she would fly between New York and Oregon to see her divorced parents as a kid. She mentions briefly getting lost in New York herself between flights, and having to hide in a phone booth overnight. Kevin asks why she didn't go to the police, and the girl explains she was afraid of being put in a detention center or a foster home. They do it with runaways. They have to put them somewhere. So whatever you do, don't get lost. She begins to listen to her Walkman, as does Kevin, who is a little confused about why she's warning him about New York when they're flying to Florida. Again, the scene comes off as slightly unnecessary, since Kevin's reason for not going to the police is a selfish one at first. He wants his own vacation. And then later on, he has legitimate reasons to run from the authorities. When the family realizes Kevin is missing, there are several scenes of Kate and Peter talking to different people, like the airport security and the Orlando police. These were all shortened and condensed in the final movie. As you may remember, in the sequel, Marv is excited to start a new chapter in his criminal career as the Sticky Bandits. He's not afraid to try to steal from a charity basket in broad daylight, and continues to act like a kleptomaniac throughout the movie. In the script, the Sticky Bandits idea is never brought up, and Marv even considers putting a hold on their unsavory activities. A moment later, it's Marv who thinks he sees Kevin in the crowd. The movie changed this to Harry, who arguably hates Kevin just the tiniest bit more, or at the very least, Harry is the more threatening of the two. In the script, Kevin checks into the fictional Kensington Towers Hotel, which became the real Plaza Hotel in the movie. That means, in case anyone is curious, this draft does not include Donald Trump in the hotel lobby. The hotel staff is here, but they are written a bit more as just generic adults that Kevin is able to trick. I feel like casting the actors like Tim Curry, Rob Schneider, and Dana Ivey really helped flesh them out. In the first Home Alone movie, Kevin is supposed to be 8 years old. The sequel takes place the next year, and in one of the hotel scenes, Kevin remarks that he's 10. In the script version, he says he's 9, but in a later scene in the script set in the toy store, he says he's 11. I'm going to chalk this up to some sort of miscommunication, but I thought it was worth noting. While in Florida, Kate wonders if Kevin returned to their home in Chicago. She dials the McAllister house to see if Kevin is home alone too, but as we know, he's home alone too, lost in New York. Another scene with the family in Florida was planned, where Jeff wakes up in the middle of the night to see Buzz motionlessly staring out the window. Jeff assumes Buzz can't sleep because he's worried about Kevin, and tries to comfort his brother. Buzz is actually watching a woman across the way get undressed with her drapes open. Back in New York, a scene was planned with Kevin checking himself out in the mirror and talking to himself. Again, very much like the scene in the first movie. The script does not include another iconic aftershave scream, but Chris Columbus mentions in the first movie's commentary that they filmed a version with that. He says they ended up cutting it because it felt too close to the first movie, which is really saying something considering all the other scenes that parallel the first movie. If you were unfortunate enough to play the Home Alone 2 game for the NES or Super Nintendo, you might remember that Kevin has some toy guns that shoot fists as weapons. This was actually present in the movie's screenplay as a toy Kevin picks up at Duncan's store. Speaking of Duncan, Mr. Duncan is not the man who rings Kevin up. Instead, it's a middle-aged woman who tells Kevin about the store's owner. She does not give him the turtle doves in this version. While in the toy store, Marv finds a little gripping toy and hopes to use it for pickpocketing. He tries to demonstrate this to Harry by picking his own pocket, but ends up grabbing the skirt of an attractive woman. The same woman he already bumped into on the street earlier, and who will eventually deck him in the following scene. Kevin's escape from the hotel is different, since this movie did not show him watching Angels with Even Filthier Souls earlier. He does not use the gangster movie to trick the hotel staff, and instead escapes through the kitchen. The madcap chase was used in the Nintendo game, although the movie script does not include a fight with a chef who ends up losing all his clothes in the process. That gem came from the good old game devs at THQ.
Like, what's with the stripping chef?
Why is the man upside down with his pants around his ankles?
Weird, man.
Why?
After the scene with Kevin looking at his relative's currently abandoned brownstone, there was a scene at the Orlando airport of Kate and Peter getting ready to fly out to New York. Since Kevin's the one with the money and credit cards, Leslie says she and Frank will pay for Kate and Peter's flight. Frank begins to complain, pointing out that this is the second year Kevin's done something like this. Peter finally loses his patience at his brother. I just hope that something like this never happens to you. You're gonna feel pretty damn low accepting the help of others when you give so little of your own. My child's been missing for 2 days, and all you care about is your goddamn money. Frank tries to apologize, but Peter doesn't want to hear it. Buzz gives Peter a hug and asks that they tell Kevin that he really is sorry. And for once, Buzz is being completely sincere. As Kate and Peter board the plane, everyone turns to Frank. Fuller helpfully says that he's still an excellent baseball coach. As Kevin walks down the creepy streets of New York at night, he still encounters creepy homeless folks and hookers, but also gets chased by a group of teenage thugs. As it turns out, they're not chasing Kevin, but trying to catch a bus that happens to be in the same direction. Later, when he befriends the pigeon lady, they don't hang out in Carnegie Hall, but rather in the sewers. I suppose that's unfortunately the more realistic of the two options. While the first draft of the Home Alone script I looked at had some different booby traps, the ones in this one stay closer to the final traps we see. There are, of course, a few changes. In the movie, Kevin uses his monster soap, whatever that is, to coat a ladder and the floor of the basement to slip up the burglars. In the script, he also uses it to trip them when they run out of the toy store, instead of the makeshift seesaw that launches Harry onto a car. In the script, Kevin hits Marv with 1 brick, but in the movie, Kevin really unleashes his inner Ignatz and hits Marv with 4 bricks, all of them very well aimed. After getting covered in paint, the screenplay has Marv try to wipe himself off with a nearby cloth. Kevin has covered it in glue, so Marv ends up ripping off his facial hair instead. The movie version has Marv go to the sink and end up getting electrocuted while trying to use it. Although this one is one of the most outrageous traps in the franchise, it's also one of the most memorable. Marv turning into a screaming skeleton is one of those images that's very hard to forget. After the burglars have been arrested, a scene was written where the police officers greet the pigeon lady by name, Annie. Since it's Christmas, they offer to take her to their party, which she accepts. It seems that once again, John Hughes tried to do something with a bell for Kevin and his mother's reunion. Very early in the script, Peter is shown packing a special Christmas ornament called the McAllister Bell. When Kevin stands at the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, the wind picks up and he hears a familiar ring. Somehow recognizing such a small sound in the middle of New York, he approaches the tree and finds the bell hanging on it. Turning around, he sees his mother. Just like in the first movie, I just don't think this worked, and clearly someone else didn't because it ended up getting dropped again. Also, Peter is with Kate for the reunion. As they head back to the hotel with Kevin, the police car drives by with the humiliated burglars riding inside. Just like in the first movie, Kevin gives them a friendly wave. Despite Harry and Marv attempting to rob a children's charity and then trying to shoot Kevin, there's something that feels just a little cruel about this moment in the script. More so than the similar scene in movie number 1. This was just one too many hits to the crotch for them, and I think it was a wise choice to cut it. You might be wondering, if Kevin never met Mr. Duncan, and he never got the turtle doves, how did Duncan know to send all the presents to the hotel? Because the stationery Kevin used for his letter in the script was apparently the hotel stationery. Speaking of the hotel, when Kevin, Kate, and Peter return, who should they find but the rest of the family there? Frank apparently flew them all down as a true apology to Peter. Kate assures him that they'll take care of the expenses, which puts Frank in a much better mood. In fact, it's Frank who then asks Kevin what he did in New York, to which Kevin responds, "Same thing I did last year." Finally, the ending is a bit shorter. Instead of going out to the park to see the pigeon lady, Annie, one last time with the turtle doves, Kevin simply looks out the window and sees her in the distance. The two of them share a wave, and pigeons fly everywhere. Again, it's very much like Kevin's final exchange with his neighbor in the first movie, just with more pigeons. As I said, the sequel almost feels like a remake of the first movie at a lot of points. I remember several years ago reading an article somewhere, which I cannot find right now, saying that Home Alone 2 actually feels like a very realistic sequel. Not because of the slapstick or a child committing credit card fraud, but because no one in this family has learned anything from the previous year's experience. Kevin and his mother have a very, very similar argument the night before the flight again, and both of them have to make amends again after Kevin gets separated again. Although it's always possible to change for the better, it can take time, and we do tend to repeat our mistakes, no matter what lessons we've learned in the past. So yeah, I guess the sequel got that right. Home Alone proved to be very influential for family comedies. I know movies where kids outsmart adults weren't new at the time, nor were the slapstick sequences, but there was definitely an influx in both of those after the first movie's success. Even John Hughes did a similar thing in his script for the 101 Dalmatians remake, where Cruella really gets put through the ringer by a bunch of puppies. And although Home Alone will always probably be best remembered for the booby traps, I hope this video has also reminded you of why this movie is so beloved. It has a heart. It knows when to quiet down and focus on the sentimental parts of the holiday season. It even acknowledges how gloomy and sad the holidays can be when you're alone, seeing all sorts of other families and friends together. There are plenty of points where it violently tugs at your heartstrings and refuses to let go, until Daniel Stern falls down a flight of stairs. As for my personal feelings, I have very early memories of watching both Home Alones and loving them. Funny enough, I actually looked a lot like Macaulay Culkin as a kid. One of my cousins, as a joke, in one of our old photo albums, actually stuck a newspaper clipping of the poster for The Good Son alongside a picture of me, and apparently I didn't even notice. But maybe that just means I was a stupid kid, I don't know. Either way, here's a picture of me at age 7. Look at that little page master. I remember one winter actually running through the O'Hare airport with all the Christmas decorations up trying to catch our flight. Thankfully, we made it and I didn't end up on the wrong flight, but you can bet that the John Williams music was playing in my head the entire time. To this day, I love these movies, I love the soundtrack, I love everything, the slapstick, the wit, the heart. It really does combine to make a wonderful viewing experience. Were there any scenes that were discussed here that you wish had made it into the final cut of Home Alone or its sequel? The nightmare scene, maybe? Or perhaps Uncle Frank's redemption arc? Let me know in the comments, and feel free to share your own Home Alone memories. And so, as Johnny the Gangster observed, keep the change, you filthy animals. Everyone.
What are you doing? You're crying?
No!
You're crying from Home Alone?
The old man got to me.
All right.